During a family vacation, my parents took my credit card and laughed. "You won't need this anyway," they said. I smiled and said, "That's funny because I just canceled it." They started screaming when the hotel manager walked in and said, "I knew this trip would be a disaster before we even left the house." My parents always acted like the world owed them something just for existing. I should have known something was up when my dad suddenly invited me on this family trip to Florida. They barely talked to me unless they needed something, but I went because my younger brother, Bryan, begged me to come. He's the only one in my family I care about, so I thought, why not? A week in Florida wouldn't be so bad. I was wrong. From the moment we arrived, my parents treated me like an ATM. They expected me to pay for everything without even asking. It started small: coffee, snacks at the airport, a cab ride to the hotel, but by the second day, they were charging meals to my room, booking activities under my name, and using my credit card like it was theirs. I confronted them, and my mom just waved me off. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You make plenty of money. What's a little vacation expense?" My dad nodded like it was no big deal. "It's not like you have a family to take care of. You should be grateful we invited you." I was furious. They invited me just to make me pay for everything? Seriously? The final straw came on the fourth night. We were sitting in the hotel lounge when my dad pulled out my credit card, grinning. "You won't need this anyway," he said, laughing as he put it in his pocket. My mom giggled too. I just smiled and said, "That's funny because I just canceled it." Their faces changed instantly. My dad looked shocked, and my mom's eyes went wide. "What?" my dad said, his voice panicked. I showed them the notification on my phone: card successfully cancelled. My mom's jaw tightened. "Tell me you're joking." I shrugged. "Nope. The bank said any transactions will be declined. Hope you weren't planning on using it." That's when the hotel manager walked in. He was tall and serious, wearing a sharp suit. He didn't waste time. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "there's a problem with your account. Your credit card has been declined." My parents looked at each other, then back at him. "That must be a mistake," my dad said quickly. "Run it again." The manager raised an eyebrow. "We already did, multiple times." Then he turned to me. "Would you like to provide another way to pay for the room, sir?" My parents immediately looked at me, expecting me to fix it like I always did, but not this time. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and said, "Oh, I'm not paying for their room. That's their responsibility." My mom's face turned red. "Excuse me?" My dad scoffed. "Come on, don't be ridiculous." But the manager wasn't playing their game. "In that case," he said, "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, you'll need to pay your balance immediately, otherwise, we'll have to ask you to leave." That's when they lost it. My mom started yelling about how unfair this was and how I owed them because they're my parents. My dad turned to me, his voice low and angry. "You canceled the card without telling us? Do you know what you've done?" "Oh, I know exactly what I've done," I said calmly. "I stopped you from using me like a free bank." The manager cleared his throat. "If you can't pay, we'll have to call the authorities." That's when the real screaming started. My mom wailed about how I was ruining the trip, and my dad ranted about how kids these days have no respect. Everyone in the lounge was staring, even the bartenders. Bryan, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke up. "Why don't you just pay for your own room?" he asked. It was a simple, reasonable question, but my dad turned on him, snapping, "Stay out of this." That was a mistake. Bryan, who had spent his whole life watching our parents use and manipulate me, had finally had enough. He stood up so fast his chair almost fell over. His face was red with anger. "No," he said firmly, "I'm not staying out of this. I'm done pretending this is okay." My dad looked stunned for a second, like he couldn't believe Bryan had talked back. Then his face darkened. "You don't talk to me like that," he growled. "Sit down." Bryan didn't sit. Instead, he turned to me. "Let's go," he said. "Right now. I don't want to be here anymore." I hesitated. I didn't want to leave him alone with them. "Go where?" My mom snapped. "You're a child. You don't get to just leave." Bryan scoffed. "I'm 18. I can do whatever I want." That's when my dad lunged at Bryan. He grabbed Bryan's wrist hard, yanking him back. Bryan tried to pull away, but my dad held on tight, his fingers digging into Bryan's skin. "You think you're grown now?" My dad sneered. "You think you can just walk away from this family?" "Let him go," I said, my voice low, but my dad didn't. He just kept squeezing. I stood up so fast my chair fell over with a loud bang. The whole lounge went silent. Everyone was watching. "Let him go," I repeated, my voice steady. My dad turned to me, but he must have seen something in my face because his grip loosened just enough. Bryan pulled his arm free and stepped back, breathing hard. Then, in a moment of perfect karma, the hotel manager stepped forward again. "That's enough," he said coldly. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, come with me, now." My mom looked outraged. "What? Why?" The manager didn't blink. Because several guests saw you grab a young man against his will, and because your account is still unpaid, security is on the way. For the first time, my parents looked scared. My dad turned to me, his voice soft and desperate. Listen, we need to talk about this. We're still family. You don't want to do this. I tilted my head. No, you don't want me to do this, but I think I do. Before he could say more, 2 security guards walked in. They were big and serious, the kind of guys who meant business. Is there a problem here? One asked. The manager nodded. Escort them out. My mom let out a high-pitched laugh. You can't be serious, we're guests here. Not anymore, the manager said. My dad tried one last thing. He turned to Bryan, his face pleading. You're really going to let them do this to us, after everything we've done for you? Bryan looked down at his red wrist, then back up. You didn't do anything for me, he said. You did everything to me. And just like that, security grabbed my parents and escorted them out the door. I breathed out, feeling lighter than I had in years. Bryan turned to me, his eyes wide, still processing everything. So, I said, forcing a smile, I guess it's just us now. Bryan nodded. Guess so, but the night wasn't over yet. Just as we were about to go back to our room, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank, a fraud alert. My parents had tried to open a new credit card in my name. I stared at my phone, feeling sick. Fraud alert. My parents actually tried to open a credit card in my name. Bryan noticed my expression. What is it? I showed him my phone, and his face turned angry. Are you kidding me? He said. Nope, I muttered. They didn't even wait an hour before trying to screw me over again. I tapped the notification and called my bank right there in the hotel lounge. After a few rings, a man named Lucas answered. Hello, this is Lucas with Capital One Fraud Prevention. How can I help you? Yeah, I said, keeping my voice calm. I just got an alert. Someone tried to open a credit card in my name. That wasn't me. Lucas got serious right away. I understand. I'll need to check some information first, and then we'll look into this. I answered his questions, confirmed who I was, and within minutes, he was checking my account. Okay, Lucas said. It looks like the application was made just a few minutes ago from a device using the Wi-Fi at the Sunview Resort in Florida. I almost laughed. That's the hotel I'm at. They're not even trying to hide it. Bryan shook his head, shocked. Lucas continued. We'll block this application right away, and I recommend you freeze your credit immediately. I can transfer you to our identity theft department if you'd like. Yeah, I said, do that. While I was on hold, Bryan crossed his arms. So, what now? We just keep stopping them every time they try something? I clenched my jaw. No, this time, we fight back. As soon as my call ended, I pulled up my parents' contact info. Then, I did something I'd never done before. I called them. It rang twice before my dad answered, still sounding mad. Oh, now you want to talk? I didn't waste time. Hey, Dad, just wanted to let you know your credit card fraud attempt got flagged. My bank is looking into it now. Silence. Then, my mom's voice in the background. What did he say? My dad hesitated. We didn't. Oh, don't even start. I cut in. The bank traced it back to this hotel's Wi-Fi. You're the only ones who would try this right after getting kicked out. You're being ridiculous. My mom snapped. Now on the phone. We were just trying to fix things. You left us stranded. I almost laughed. Fix things by stealing my identity? You gave us no choice, she hissed. We have nothing now. You did that to yourselves. I said coldly. Oh, and by the way, I just froze my credit. You won't be able to pull this again. You ungrateful little. I hung up. Bryan let out a breath. They're unbelievable. Yeah, I muttered. But they're not done. They're going to try something else. And I was right because the next morning, there was a knock at our hotel door. I opened it, half expecting security. But no, it was the police, and they were looking for me. Are you? One officer asked, serious and straight-faced. Yeah, we got a report that you stole your parents' credit card and committed fraud. I blinked. Excuse me? The second officer pulled out a notepad. Your parents filed a complaint last night. They say you stole their financial info and used it without permission. I laughed sharply. That's rich. I have a fraud alert from my bank saying they tried to open a card in my name. I was the one who reported them. The first officer looked at his partner. Do you have proof of that? Oh, I do. I showed them my bank notifications, the fraud alert, the call history with the bank, and even the email confirming my credit freeze. I made sure they could see the timestamps. The officers looked it over, nodding slowly. Well, one of them said, that changes things. Yeah, I said, crossing my arms, and I want to press charges. My parents thought they could scare me, but they had just made their biggest mistake because now I had the law on my side. The officers took their time reviewing the proof. My parents were always good at manipulating people, but this was stupid. All right, the first officer said, putting his notepad away. This isn't looking good for them. The second officer nodded. And you're sure you want to press charges? I didn't hesitate. Yes, 100%. Bryan looked at me, surprised, not because he disagreed, but because he never thought I'd actually do it. For years, we'd just put up with their abuse and manipulation, but not anymore. The officers took my statement, collected all the proof, and told me they'd be in touch. Then they left. Bryan whistled. Holy crap, you actually did it. Yep, I said, and I'm not done, because I knew exactly where my parents were. After they got kicked out of the hotel, they were stuck, no credit cards, no cash, just their luggage and their bad attitudes. I knew they were scrambling to find a way out, so I decided to make it worse. While the police were handling the fraud case, I made another call to the rental car company. Hi, I said sweetly, I need to report a car that might be used without permission. See, my parents had rented a car under my name before the trip, another thing they'd forgotten to tell me, but that rental? It was still in my name. I explained everything to the company, how I was the legal renter, how my parents were committing fraud, and how I was worried they'd try to take the car and run. The customer service rep was happy to help. Not a problem, she said. We'll report the car as unauthorized. Security will find it and bring it back. Oh, and the best part? They'd be banned from renting from that company ever again. Bryan laughed when I told him, dude, you're destroying them. Yeah, I said, and I'm just getting started. Later that afternoon, I got an update from the police. My parents had been picked up at a cheap motel after causing a scene when their card got declined again. Apparently, they'd been begging strangers to use their phone, saying their ungrateful kids had scammed them. The police didn't buy it. They were arrested for trying to steal my identity, and since my dad had grabbed Bryan the night before, the hotel manager gave the police security footage as extra proof for an assault charge. But here's where it gets even better. Remember that rental car? When security towed it back, they found stolen hotel stuff inside, robes, towels, even a mini fridge. So, guess who got hit with theft charges? Yep, by then, my parents were completely screwed. No money, no car, a criminal record. And guess what? Their house back home? It wasn't even theirs. They were behind on the mortgage. Turns out, they'd been using my credit for years to keep up with payments. Now that I'd frozen my credit, they couldn't pay. Within 3 months, the bank took their house. Bryan and I never spoke to them again. We finished the trip without them, stayed at the resort, and even upgraded to a nicer room with the money I saved by not paying for their stuff. A few months later, I moved Bryan in with me, far away from our parents. He started college, finally free from their control. As for my parents, they ended up in a rundown apartment with no credit, no savings, and no one left to use. Their last desperate move? They emailed me a long, sad message about forgiveness and family. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to their parole officer, because some people don't deserve a second chance.